You either pay or get out. That's what Jason said, calm, like he was just reading off a receipt. I was still holding the coffee pot when he said it. Steam was rising right in front of my face. I hadn't even poured my own cup yet, just his. 2 sugars, no cream, the way he's liked it since college. Some habits just stick, even after they start to hurt. He didn't even look at me, just stood there by the fridge in yesterday's shirt, barefoot, scrolling through his phone like we'd had this talk 100 times before. And maybe, in a way, we had. Not those exact words, but that tone, that edge in his voice, that feeling like I owed him something. I paid the utility bill, Jason, I said, keeping my voice steady, and I bought the groceries, twice. He made this sound, somewhere between a scoff and a laugh. Groceries? You think that covers everything? I think it covers more than you want to admit. That's when he snapped. He didn't yell, didn't shove. He just picked up his mug and flung what was left of his coffee toward the sink. Only it didn't land in the sink. It hit me, right across the sleeve of the cardigan I've had since last winter. Light beige, wool, warm, soft, my favorite. The coffee wasn't scalding, just hot enough to sting, and spread. But honestly, it was the look on his face that stung more. No regret, just blank, like I was background noise, an inconvenience, something to be cleared out of the way. He didn't say sorry, didn't even flinch, just walked around me, opened the fridge, grabbed the orange juice, poured himself a glass, took a sip, then said it again, like it meant nothing. You either pay or get out. And then he left the kitchen. No footsteps following, no apology coming around the corner, just the quiet hum of the dishwasher behind me and the slow drip of coffee off my sleeve. I stood there for a while, tried to dab at the stain with a dish rag, pointless. The brown just spread like a bruise across my arm. I looked down at my purse hanging off the back of the chair and thought about all the times I'd opened it without thinking twice. Back in high school, Jason would say, "Thanks, Mom, I'll pay you back." In college, it turned into, "You know I appreciate it." And lately, just, "You got it right." I always thought love meant helping, giving. But what do you do when giving starts to feel like disappearing? I didn't cry, not then. I picked up my purse, slid my phone inside, reached for my coat, then paused. Left it on the hook. It wasn't cold yet, not really. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and just kept walking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. I walked for a while, not really looking at anything. The early spring chill clung to my coat, and my purse strap kept digging into my shoulder. I remember passing that old hardware store Jason used to love when he was little, the one with the train set in the window. Funny how time turns everything into something else. A memory, a bruise, a lesson. When I found the diner, I slid into a booth by the window. The waitress didn't ask much. She just brought over a cup of black coffee and a plate of toast. I nodded, said thank you, but I couldn't eat. The toast just sat there, curling at the edges like cardboard. Near the restroom, there was this bulletin board full of flyers, cleaning services, missing pets, Bible studies. And right there, tucked between a yoga class and a tire coupon, was this lavender pamphlet for Golden Haven Retirement Community. Independent living with dignity, it said. I just stared at it like it had spoken to me. By noon, I was on a city bus riding through streets I'd driven for years, but never really looked at. All I had with me was my tote bag, my wallet, and a mess of thoughts I couldn't untangle. Jason's voice kept playing in my head. You either pay or get out. Years ago, I gave him my savings to help with custody lawyers. He cried in my kitchen that day, told me, "I'll never forget this, Mom." But I guess he did. The bus dropped me off a block from Golden Haven. It was smaller than I'd imagined, tucked behind some maple trees and an old dentist's office. Still, it felt peaceful. Or maybe I just needed it to feel that way. Inside, it smelled like lemon polish and something sweet. Peaches, maybe. The front desk was run by a woman with curly auburn hair and a cardigan covered in cat pins. She looked up from her computer with this gentle, cautious smile. "Hi there," she said. "Can I help you?" I stood there, not sure what to say. Then I heard myself ask, "Do you take walk-ins?" She didn't even blink. "We do," she said, kind. "It's rare, but yes. My name's Darlene. Why don't you have a seat for a minute?" I dropped into the waiting room chair like I'd just run a marathon. Darlene didn't push. She handed me a clipboard, then quietly took it back when she saw my hands were shaking. "Let's get you a temporary room for tonight," she said. "We'll figure out the rest later." The room was small but clean. Twin bed, a little dresser, floral curtains. I set my bag down on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my coat. The walls didn't know me. The silence didn't judge me. And finally, I let the tears come. They didn't come soft either. I shook with them. I don't know how long I sat there, eyes red, nose raw. Then came a soft knock on the door. And a quiet voice, "I brought you some chamomile tea." The tea was warm, gentle, chamomile with a little honey. The hand that gave it to me was steady, warm too. It belonged to a woman with silver in her hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen plenty. She didn't say a word at first, just handed me the mug and sat nearby, like she understood that silence can hold more than words ever will. I hadn't been touched like that in years, not gently, not without strings. Sometimes kindness from a stranger feels louder than the silence from your own family. Her name was Marilyn. "Like Monroe," she said with a wink, "only I'm still around." She wore this bright scarf tied snug around her neck, red lipstick, and the kind of posture that said she didn't take crap from anyone. She told me she lived 3 doors down. "You'll hear me," she said. "I hum when I dust, mostly Sinatra." That morning, I found myself in the common room with her and another resident, a quiet man named Walter. He wore suspenders, polished shoes, and always had this faint smell of tobacco on his jacket, though he never smoked near us. "Jazz man," Marilyn whispered. "Saxophone. You'll like him." The 3 of us sat near this big window where sunlight poured across the floor. Breakfast was simple: eggs, toast, and fruit. I just picked at mine, but no one pushed. Marilyn didn't, Walter didn't. They just talked about the birds outside, the crocus blooms, the crossword puzzle in the local paper. No questions, no digging, just the moment we were in. "I've got a lavender plant out back," Walter said as he reached for his cane. "Started it 2 years ago. She's stubborn, like me." Then he looked at me. "Want to see it?" I paused, but Marilyn gave my elbow a nudge. "Go on, it's not far. Smells better than your room anyway." So I followed him out into the courtyard. The air was soft, bees were buzzing, birds were singing. Some people were tending raised garden beds, others just sat with their coffee and books. Walter led me to this low bush with tiny purple blossoms. "You don't have to grow anything," he said, brushing his hand across the plant. "Sometimes just sitting here is enough." I nodded, didn't trust my voice. I hadn't sat in a garden in, honestly, I couldn't remember. Years, maybe. That night, before I went to bed, Marilyn knocked again, this time with a paperback in her hand. "You'll like this one," she said, pressing it into my hands. "No sad endings, I promise." After she left, I got into bed and opened the book. A little something slipped out. A small pressed flower, lavender from Walter's plant, and a folded scrap of paper. In thick, curly handwriting, it said, "You're not alone." I didn't cry, not like before, but something in me loosened, something settled. And when I got invited to a little dinner group later that week, I surprised myself. I said yes. It wasn't a big thing, just a Wednesday meal with people who felt a little less like strangers, but it meant something, like I was saying yes to more than just supper. That night, the book stayed open on my chest, the flower still tucked inside, and for the first time in a long while, I thought I might actually sleep through the night without waking up from a memory. If you've ever found yourself sitting in a quiet room, holding something small that somehow feels like hope, then maybe you know what that lavender flower meant to me. And if you do, I'd love to know. Has a stranger ever shown you kindness when you needed it most? Leave a comment. I really would love to hear your story. And if this feels familiar, if you've ever felt forgotten by the people you love, but found strength in the last place you expected, consider subscribing. There's more to this journey than tea and garden walks. Next time, well, let's just say, not all kindness is easy to accept. I'll be right here when you're ready. By Thursday, I already knew the breakfast staff by name. I knew how the sunlight curved through the fence in the courtyard. Funny how quickly a rhythm can form when you're not trying to run from it. Darlene handed me my tea with a soft smile. Need anything today? I paused, then said, a cab. Her eyebrows lifted a little, but she didn't push. Bank, pharmacy, or escape plan? I smiled, just a little. Bank. The ride over felt longer than it really was. The city looked different from the backseat of a cab. Maybe it was because I wasn't driving. Or maybe because for once, there was no one waiting for me on the other end. No errands, no lists, just me. I sat a little taller. At the bank, I asked to speak with someone about my accounts. The clerk, Eli, according to his badge, looked like he could have been my grandson's age. He greeted me with this quiet respect that almost made my eyes sting. I'd like to check who has access to my accounts, I said, and make a few changes. He nodded and pulled up my file. Looks like there's shared access with Jason Carter. My hands didn't shake when I said, I'd like to remove him. Eli walked me through everything. I changed my PIN, updated the mailing address. I even revised the beneficiaries, something I hadn't touched since my husband passed. It all felt clean, like wiping a chalkboard before you start over. On the way back, I leaned my head against the window and watched the city roll past. A little thrift shop caught my eye as we neared Golden Haven. Can we stop here? I asked the driver. Inside, I wandered, not looking for anything really, just touching fabrics, flipping through hangers. I ended up finding a lavender sweater, cotton wool blend, my size. I tried it on in front of a dusty mirror, and for a second, I saw someone I almost recognized. Later that evening, Marilyn spotted me in the lounge. Well, she said, arms crossed and smiling, someone's having a glow-up. It was $3, I told her. She gave me this knowing look. It's not the price, it's the posture. I sat by the window with my tea for a bit, didn't check my phone, not until it buzzed. A message from Jason. Rent's due. You gonna help or not? That was it. No hello, no how are you, just a demand thrown into a sentence. I stared at it for a second, then hit delete. No reply, no guilt, no noise. And before I even realized it, I was smiling, just a little. Out in the hallway, someone had put on jazz again, probably Walter. The air smelled faintly like cinnamon and lavender dryer sheets. I pulled the sweater a little closer around me. It wasn't just something I found in a thrift store. It felt like a quiet little flag, one that said, I'm here, I'm choosing me. And for once, that felt like enough. The sweater still smelled faintly like roses and old wood, like someone else's story had soaked into it, just waiting for a new chapter. I liked that idea, that maybe I wasn't starting over from scratch. Maybe I was just picking up a thread someone kind had left behind. Starting over in your 60s? You stop asking for permission. Marilyn had warned me that potluck night was serious business. You show up empty-handed, you leave empty-stomached, she joked, dropping a stack of mismatched paper plates onto a folding table. Then she handed me a pie dish. Your hands don't look broken. Make something. I stood in the kitchen for a bit, unsure where to begin. The pantry had the basics, and Darlene said I could borrow anything I needed. I scanned the shelves: flour, sugar, lemons. My hand paused at the zester. It was muscle memory at that point. Before I could talk myself out of it, I was rolling dough and humming under my breath. Lemon tarts. I hadn't made them in years. Jason used to love them, back when he was little enough to sit on the counter and sneak bits of crust before they made it to the oven. Later, when he got older and angrier, I stopped baking. He once told me they were too sweet, too fussy, so I stopped. That night, I brought them back. The rec room smelled like cinnamon and chili. People were moving slow, laughing between bites, trading half sentences and tired old jokes. Walter had his Bluetooth speaker going, and Miles Davis floated through the air like a warm tide. "Is that lemon?" Harold asked, eyeing my tray like it had offended him personally. "It is." He took a bite, frowned, then took another. "Could use less crust." "Thanks for the feedback," I said. He came back for seconds. Near the drinks table, someone asked, "So, do you have family nearby?" This time, I didn't flinch. I just smiled. They're figuring themselves out. Walter gave me a look, not nosy, just solid, like he got it. Later, once the plates were cleared and someone put on Ella Fitzgerald, Walter stood and held out his hand. "Miss Evelyn," he said, all dramatic and charming, "may I have this dance?" "I haven't danced in years," I said, half laughing, half nervous. He didn't lower his hand. "Neither have I." We waltzed, slowly. His hand was warm in mine. The whole room swayed around us. And for the first time in a long time, I laughed. Not politely, not guarded. I just let go. Marilyn clapped from the couch. "Look at you two. Try not to pull anything." The dance didn't last long. Our knees had opinions. But still, it was enough. I felt lighter, like something inside me had finally let out a breath. Back in my room, I took off the lavender sweater and folded it at the foot of the bed. I turned down the lights, but I wasn't ready to sleep. Instead, I reached into the drawer and pulled out an old notebook I hadn't touched since before my husband passed. The leather cover was worn, the spine cracked. I opened it, uncapped a pen, and paused. Then I wrote, "Who am I, outside of being someone's mother?" I didn't have the answer, not yet, but I'd started the question, and for now, maybe that was enough. The notebook stayed on my nightstand. It didn't hold answers, at least not yet, but it kept asking the right questions. Every night, I opened it and wrote a few words. Nothing fancy, sometimes messy, but they were mine. Grief doesn't always show up with a funeral. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly, in the way your name stops being said out loud, the way no one notices you've left the room, the silence of a phone that hasn't buzzed in 2 weeks. It had been 14 days since I walked out of Jason's house. 14 mornings with chamomile tea, 14 nights of sleep, not wondering who I'd disappointed. That morning, I wrapped myself in my cardigan and walked to the garden. The winter air was sharp, but the sunlight felt kind. It stretched across the benches like it had picked this place on purpose. I knelt by the little patch of soil I'd claimed and pressed my fingers into the dirt. Winter sage, tough, no nonsense, and it smells like something that stays. Marilyn told me it doesn't need much, just a little space and time. I liked that. As I worked, I realized I was talking out loud, just a whisper. He used to love lemonade, Jason. When he was little, I'd make it way too sweet on purpose, just so it dripped down his chin, arms sticky, grinning like he'd never been happier. My voice cracked, but I didn't stop. He had this way of clapping when he was excited, both hands over his head like he couldn't hold the joy inside. I blinked the cold from my eyes and kept planting. Later, back in my room, I opened a drawer and found an old photo tucked inside a calendar I'd never finished. Jason, maybe 7, squinting in the sun, shirt crooked, lemonade stains. I stared longer than I meant to, then folded it gently and slid it back. In the notebook, I wrote, "I was a good mother. I still am." The words felt stronger than I expected. That afternoon, I wandered into the little library. It smelled like old pages and hand lotion. Someone had left a peppermint candy on the counter. I picked up a book called Financial Independence After 60, checked it out like it was a secret mission. Back at my desk, I started a list, what I'd need to live on my own, to really, finally choose myself. Rent, groceries, health insurance, a new phone plan. I wasn't overwhelmed, just awake, more awake than I'd been in years. Walter found me later, sitting on the same garden bench. I was holding a thermos of cider. He didn't say a word, just handed me a cup and sat beside me. That kind of presence, the kind that doesn't ask for anything back, I'd forgotten how much I needed it. By evening, I made the call. Law offices of Reed and Bell, the receptionist said. "I'd like to revise my will," I told her. "Remove someone, add someone else." She booked me for next week. I wrote it down in the notebook. Just as I was setting the phone down, there was a knock at my door. A nurse peeked in, new face, I hadn't caught her name yet. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "there's someone here asking for you. Says he's your son." I didn't move. The whole room went quiet, like even the air was holding its breath. I folded the notebook page and closed the cover slowly.
"Well," I whispered, mostly to myself, "that didn't take long." If you've ever had to choose yourself after years of choosing everyone else, tell me. I read your comments, sometimes with tea, sometimes with tears. And if someone ever showed up after you finally started to heal, what did you say? What would you say? I'd really like to know. His voice hadn't changed. That clipped, polished tone, like he was reading off a cue card, that's what hit me first. Not the flowers, not the too sweet smile. Just the voice, the one he always used when he wanted something. "Mom," Jason said, stepping into the lounge like he owned the space, "can we talk?" He held out a to-go coffee cup, all showy, from that place on Main, the one you used to like. I took it, but didn't drink. "Thanks." He sat across from me, still in that expensive coat I probably helped pay for. "So, this place, it's nice," he said, glancing around like he was sizing up a hotel lobby. "You settled in?" I nodded. "It's quiet. People are kind." Jason gave a little laugh. "Well, I'm glad you're comfortable. You deserve that." It landed sideways. He never used to say things like that, unless he was softening the ground for whatever came next. So I waited. He leaned in, elbows on his knees, hands folded. "Look, I'll get to the point. I'm in a bit of a tight spot right now. Business stuff. Nothing serious, just juggling things short term." I watched the steam rise from the coffee, said nothing. "I was thinking," he went on, voice lighter now, kind of breezy, "if you still have that joint account, or even just your card, maybe you could spot me for a few weeks, just this once." And there it was, not even 5 minutes in. I let the silence speak for me. He rushed to fill it, like always. "I mean, you helped before. Remember when I was going through the divorce? You said you'd always be there." I nodded. "I remember." His smile slipped a little. "It's not like I'm asking for the world, Mom. Just a little help to get back on track." I took a sip of the coffee, lukewarm, too sweet, just like him. "I thought you wanted to see me do well," he added, a little more force in his voice now. "You're my mom." That line used to work. It used to hit me hard, used to make me feel like I was failing if I didn't fix it for him. But I wasn't that woman anymore, not the one standing outside his house, holding pie, and having nowhere to go. I stood up slowly, careful not to spill the coffee, set it gently on the table between us. "You're right," I said softly. "I am your mother." He smiled, hopeful. I looked him in the eye. "But I'm not your bank, Jason. Not anymore." He blinked. "Wait, what?" I didn't explain. Didn't justify, didn't cry. Just turned and walked back down the hallway toward the soft sound of Walter's jazz floating from the rec room. The air behind me stayed still, like even the moment wasn't sure what it would become. But I already knew. It was mine. He didn't follow me out, didn't raise his voice, didn't slam a door or plead or argue. He just sat there, blinking, like I'd short-circuited some script he'd been running for years. I walked slowly back to my room. The hallway was quiet, humming with low TV static and the faint sound of someone laughing behind a closed door. Just an ordinary sound, but it reminded me the world was still moving, even if something inside me had just shifted. I closed the door gently and sat on the edge of the bed. I wasn't crying. I wasn't even angry. I was just trying to breathe past that weight in my chest. I'd said no, and he heard it. For so long, I taught myself that love meant giving, bending, stretching myself thin so someone else could feel full. But what if love, real love, also meant stopping, putting something down and saying, this isn't mine to carry anymore? The tea kettle on my nightstand was still warm. I hadn't touched it all day. I stared at the little green light blinking on its base, caught in it. A memory bubbled up. Years ago, during one of Jason's breakups. I'd been sitting in this same position, back stiff, hands clenched, trying to comfort him through tears and drama that weren't even mine. He was so upset, I didn't dare say anything that might push him further. That silence became my way of surviving. Then came a knock. Soft, familiar. Marilyn didn't wait. She walked in holding a mug wrapped in a tea towel. "Chamomile," she said. "Figured you might not want to talk. Just thought your hands might want something warm to hold." I took it. Our eyes met just long enough for her to nod, then turn to leave. At the door, she paused. "Good boundaries feel like guilt at first," she said, "but they grow into peace if you let them." The door clicked shut behind her. I sipped the tea, let it settle in my chest like an anchor. Then I reached for my notebook, the one that lived beside the bed now like an old friend. "I am allowed to protect myself," I wrote, "even from him." My hand didn't shake this time. Later, as the sun dipped behind the pine trees out back, Walter knocked softly on my doorframe. "We're heading out to dinner," he said. "Wednesday Club. Little place. Good meatloaf. Terrible coffee. You should come." I looked down at my slippers, at the tea, half gone in my hand, then back up at him. "I'd like that." The diner was dim but cozy. Marilyn ordered pie for the table. Harold argued with the waitress about soup, then tipped her 20% anyway. Someone played a blues track on the jukebox. Walter tapped his fingers along with it. And me? I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize for laughing too loud when the pie slid sideways on my plate. I didn't flinch when someone asked how my day was. I just existed. That night, I dreamed I was walking through my old house. The hallway stretched long and golden in the late afternoon light. No one called out from the kitchen. No one needed anything. It was just me, still, whole, and free. Freedom doesn't show up like a marching band. It doesn't shout, doesn't wave a flag. It arrives quietly, like steam from a warm cup of tea, or the smell of lemon and butter drifting from the oven before sunrise. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The hallway lights at Golden Haven were still dim. Outside, snow had just started to fall. There was no real reason. I just wanted to bake, so I did. The kitchen was empty, except for a radio playing softly in the staff room. I tied on one of the old aprons from the drawer by the fridge and started measuring flour. My hands moved slow, steady, like they still remembered how. It wasn't like the last time I made lemon tarts. That one felt like an offering, like I was trying to belong. But this time, it wasn't for anyone, not for Jason, not for praise, just because I wanted to taste something sweet again. About an hour in, Marilyn wandered in, still in her robe, hair wrapped in a scarf. She paused in the doorway, tilted her head. "You're humming," she said. "I guess I am." She didn't ask why, just smiled and poured herself a cup of coffee. By mid-morning, the trays were out on the common room table, and the smell alone was enough to draw a crowd. Harold was the first to dig in. "Damn," he mumbled with a full mouth, "these could bring a man back to church." Walter nodded like it was gospel. "That's a compliment," he added. I laughed, not a shy laugh, not the kind you hide behind your hand, a real one, free. Later, a few of us bundled up and went out to the garden. The snow had softened the ground just enough. Marilyn handed out bulbs wrapped in little paper towels. Tulips, crocuses, hyacinths. I planted 3. On the last one, I pressed a little wooden tag into the soil and carved my name into it with the corner of my house key. It felt like planting a quiet flag. I'm here. I'm still here. Back in my room, I changed into my lavender sweater and called the lawyer. We'd started the paperwork weeks ago, but I hadn't signed anything yet.
"I'm ready," I said. Jason was removed as a beneficiary. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like clarity. That afternoon, I sat by the window. Snow kept falling, soft, steady, drifting sideways across the glass. I opened my notebook and wrote 2 words. What now? I didn't need the answer yet, but I liked that it felt like a real question again. Later, I walked to the front desk with a small padded envelope. Inside was my old wedding ring. The gold had dulled over time, worn smooth. I asked Darlene to add it to the shelter's winter fundraiser. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Someone else might need it more than I do." She nodded and placed it gently in the donation box. That evening, while folding laundry, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox, handwritten. I turned it over slowly. Jason's wife. A baby shower invitation, pink floral border, curled lettering, and my name, spelled right this time. The envelope sat on my dresser for almost a full day before I opened it. No return address, just my name, written in this neat, swirly handwriting, careful, warm, like whoever wrote it took their time. I didn't recognize the writing, but I knew exactly who it was from. Claire, Jason's wife. I sat at the edge of my bed and opened the letter slowly, like it might fall apart in my hands. It wasn't the baby shower invitation that caught me off guard. It was the tone, soft, gracious, like nothing had ever happened. She wrote that she hoped I was doing well, that Jason had been working on himself, trying to be more present, that they'd love to see me, if I felt comfortable. That line was underlined in blue. The invitation was tucked inside, floral border, pastel ribbons printed across the top, celebrating baby Carter. Then the date, the address, and a note. No gifts necessary, just bring yourself. I stared at those words for a long time. I wanted to believe them. Claire had always been kind, sweet even, but sweet doesn't always mean safe, and kindness doesn't erase silence. She never pushed Jason, never stepped in, never called after I left. Maybe she couldn't, or maybe she chose not to. Still, I kept coming back to that line. We'd love to see you. There was a pull, that tug of grandmotherhood, of keeping the peace, of starting fresh. But underneath that, a quiet ache, that old voice whispering, maybe this time it'll be different. I slipped the letter back into the envelope and tucked it into my coat pocket. Outside, the air was brisk but gentle. The first buds were starting to open along the path behind Golden Haven. I walked slow, hands deep in my pockets, eyes on the pale sky.
Marilyn joined me halfway around the loop. She didn't say anything right away, just matched my pace. After a while, I said, "What if she's telling the truth?" Marilyn didn't look at me. She probably is, but that doesn't mean it's enough. We passed the garden gate, and she added, "You don't owe people access just because you love the idea of them." I stopped, let the words settle. Back in my room, I sat at the little writing desk and pulled out some stationery. I started drafting a response. It was polite, thankful, a little distant. I folded it, sealed the envelope. But then I just sat there, staring at it. It didn't feel dishonest, just incomplete. So I got up, went to the kitchen, and quietly tore the envelope in half. Then I opened the drawer, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote something entirely different. That evening, I walked to the mailbox near the main entrance. The air had turned colder, but I didn't rush. I slid the new envelope into the slot and paused. It wasn't addressed to Claire. It was for my lawyer. Just a few final updates, some details about medical proxies, who to notify if something happened, and one very clear instruction: I do not wish my estate to pass through Jason Carter. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. Because sometimes saying no isn't about slamming a door. It's just about choosing the right one to walk through. The baby shower happened on a sunny Sunday. I spent it in the garden, knees in the dirt, planting dahlias. It felt right, quiet, intentional. The soil was still soft from the morning dew, and the sky above looked freshly washed, this clean, open blue. I wore my lavender sweater and that old straw sun hat I found at the thrift store. There was a breeze, just enough to lift the scent of lemon balm from along the path. No one called, no texts, not from Jason, not from Claire. But honestly, I hadn't expected them to. I didn't tell anyone I wasn't going. I just didn't go. And for the first time, it didn't feel like rebellion. It was just a choice, one I made without explaining, without guilt. Walter showed up about halfway through. He brought 2 mugs of chamomile tea and sat beside me on the bench under the pergola. We didn't say much, just watched the bees move from flower to flower. He hummed a little, some old jazz tune I couldn't name, and I liked that about him. His presence didn't ask anything of me. Later in the afternoon, I brought lemon tarts to the common room. Same recipe I used to make when I was trying to prove I still mattered. This time, I made them just because I enjoy them, because I like who I am when I'm baking. Marilyn was already there, working on a jigsaw puzzle that stretched across 2 tables. When I sat down, she said, "Corner pieces only, the rest comes later." We worked quietly, sipped tea, let the conversation drift in and out, like birds resting on the windowsill before taking off again. By early evening, all the dahlias were planted. Their tight, bright buds stood like tiny guards in the soil. I labeled each clot with a little name tag, just first names: Evelyn, Walter, Marilyn. I didn't need anyone else to see them, just me. That night, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook. I made a new list, things I chose not to carry, apologies no one asked for, questions that only brought pain, guilt that was never mine, invitations that cost more than they gave. It was the heaviest list I'd ever written, and yet it made my chest feel lighter, like finally putting down a suitcase I'd been dragging around for years. Outside, the sky darkened, and in the quiet hum of evening, I heard familiar sounds float in, the low murmur of TV from down the hall, trays clinking as dinner was cleaned up, someone laughing 3 rooms over. I smiled, not because anything big had happened, but because nothing had. No performance, no drama, no ache, just peace. That night, I let myself fall asleep wrapped in lavender cotton and the soft warmth of chamomile. But just before I drifted off, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A voicemail, no caller ID, but I didn't need one. I pressed play. Jason's voice came through, low and tight, sharp in that way I remembered too well. "I heard what you did with the will. Real nice, Mom." That was it. I sat there for a second after it ended, let the silence stretch,
No fear, no anger, just stillness. Then I deleted the message and turned off my phone. I didn't delete the voicemail, but I didn't call back either. It just sat there, tucked between a robocall from the grocery store and a reminder from my dentist. I listened to it once more that morning, not to reopen any wounds, but just to remember how far I've come. His voice still had that sharp, bitter edge, the one that used to make me question everything. But now, it didn't stick. It just moved through me, like wind through an open window. Spring had arrived at Golden Haven. The magnolias were finally blooming, late this year, but brighter than I remembered. Marilyn called it my 1-year Freedom Day. She even brought a little taper crown to breakfast and tried to tape it to my head. I let her. I laughed.
I wore my favorite yellow sweater, the one I bought months ago without asking anyone what they thought. It's a bit loose now, but I love how the sleeves fall to my wrists. Feels like a quiet reminder. I get to choose what touches me. Out in the courtyard, pastel banners hung between the trees. Folding chairs were set up, and a long table covered in floral cloth held every kind of dish you could imagine. I brought lemon tarts again, but this time they weren't a symbol or a statement. They were just dessert. Walter found me standing by the roses. He handed me a small potted lemon balm, still damp from watering. "For your new beginnings," he said, smiling soft. I held it close and said, "Smells like hope." He nodded, and memory, the good kind. Later that day, during reading hour, I stood in the common room. My hands were steady, my voice was clear. I read something I'd written the week before, from my notebook. It was called Things That No Longer Own Me. The need to be needed. The ache of being misunderstood. The guilt that was never mine to carry. The silence I once wore like armor. The belief that love has to hurt in order to matter. When I finished, the room was quiet, not in an awkward way, but in that soft, sacred kind of way. Then came the clapping. Marilyn dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. Walter gave me the smallest nod, like he'd already known those words before I even said them. That evening, I found a letter slipped under my door, handwritten, sick paper, no return address. It was from the women's shelter I had donated my wedding ring to. "Your gift helped 3 women relocate safely," it said. "Your story, if you're willing to share, is already helping more." I held the letter to my chest, not out of sadness. It felt softer than that, something like closure, something like purpose. The hallway was quiet as I made my way back to my room. No one calling my name, no voices raised behind closed doors, just the creak of the floorboards and the sound of my own breath. I passed the little mirror near my doorway and caught my reflection. Same lines, same silver hair, but a steadier gaze. A self I hadn't seen in decades, finally looking back. I set the lemon balm on the windowsill, next to my notebook, turned off the light, let the night rise up around me. And I smiled, because I wasn't erased. I was rewritten by my own hand. That day, I wore my yellow sweater and read my own words out loud, not to prove anything, just because I finally believed them. No one clapped too hard, no one cried, but I felt seen. And that was enough. Sometimes love means letting go of what hurts, even when it has your child's face. We don't always get the family we dreamed of, but we can still build a life that feels like home. Dignity, I've learned, doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be yours. If any part of my story reminded you of something you've been carrying quietly, I hope you'll share it in the comments. I'd be honored to read it. And if you're still in the middle of your own rewrite, just know you're not alone. We're all finding our way home, one page at a time. And if this story stayed with you, then you might want to hear what happened when my son texted, "You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there." The next chapter? It's not about dinner, it's about dignity.
Let me tell you what I did next.